Good afternoon. It is my great honor to attend this evening's presentation of the poetry anthology Quixotica, Poems East of La Mancha. This year, 2016, marks the 400th anniversary of the death of Miguel de Cervantes, the Spanish author of Don Quixote, the second most translated book in the world after the Bible, and regarded as the first modern novel in the history of mankind. To commemorate such a noble man and his great works, the Consulate General of Spain is proud to have supported and be part of this fantastic project, Quixotica. Today we are gathered here to present the book as a reality. Poets from Hong Kong, or with relation to Hong Kong, and writing from America, Europe, Vietnam, Singapore, and the Philippines, have gathered around a fellow writer, Cervantes, who died 400 years ago, but who continues to inspire many across cultural boundaries. The book, Quixotica, is proof that we have more in common than what separates us, and that the message of the Spanish writer Cervantes is still relevant today and speaks to all of us. If you open the pages of Quixotica and see the names of those who have contributed to its making, you will realize that this book is very representative of Hong Kong, inasmuch as it reveals the character of this city, an open and cosmopolitan city. On behalf of the Consulate General of Spain in Hong Kong and Macau, I want to thank all the authors who have contributed to this book, some laureate and highly respected poets, mostly poets with a record of publications and awards, but also young, aspiring, and promising poets. They represent Hong Kong's vibrant literary life and the high standards of the academia in this city. I also want to thank Chameleon Press and Peter Gordon for inspiring this project, and the editors, David McKirdy, Tammy, Lai-ming, Germa and Juan José Morales. They will share with us soon some thoughts on Cervantes and Don Quixote during the debate that will follow these few words of mine. Besides this poetry book, the Spanish Consulate, in close collaboration with the Consulate General of Mexico, is organizing this 2016 a series of commemorative events in tribute to Cervantes. We are also supported by the Spanish Chamber of Commerce in Hong Kong and other private sponsors, of which I can mention the Spanish bank BBVA and Johnson Electric. What are those activities, very briefly? Last June, we jointly awarded the first Cervantes Schools book for excellence in Spanish language. And when I say we, I refer to all the Spanish-speaking consulates in Hong Kong. On the 9th of November, a recital of songs inspired by Don Quixote will take place at the City Hall Theatre, a concert produced by Música Viva, directed by Professor Kingman, who today joins us here today and will take part in the panel discussion. We also have theatre workshops inspired by Don Quixote for children that will take place around Hong Kong by the end of the year, and a number of other activities that you can follow on the website www.cervantes400.hk or in the leaflets at the entrance to this hall. Nothing substitutes the experience of reading Don Quixote in its original language, Spanish. To celebrate Cervantes is to celebrate the Spanish language. Indeed, every event we have held and those that are to come have been conceived to raise public awareness of Spanish, one of the most important and widely spoken languages in the world. There are many benefits stemming from learning Spanish at all levels: cultural, social, economic, employment opportunities, and at the personal and professional levels. Just as English is more than England, Spanish is more than Spain, for it is spoken in the community of Latin American countries and by over 50 million people in the United States of America. I think the importance of Spanish is increasingly obvious, as shown by the figures of the increasing number of Spanish language students, and more should certainly take heed. Speaking in this forum of the Hong Kong Book Fair and in the presentation of a poetry book, the intellectual benefits of the Spanish language become more prominent. Knowing Spanish allows one to read Don Quixote in its original version, and it is truly a treasure of world-class literature, one of the greatest contributions to humanity. In Spain, from the classics, from the classics of the Golden Age, like Calderón, Quevedo, Góngora, Lope de Vega, José de Ercilla, El Inca Garcilaso, Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, to the brilliant 20th century literature, the generation of poets, for example, of 1927, a silver age of Spanish letters, with Federico García Lorca, Rafael Alberti, Vicente Alexandre, and writers from both sides of the Atlantic, Pablo Neruda, Octavio Paz, Jorge Luis Borges, César Vallejo, Rubén Darío, Julio Cortázar, Mario Vargas Llosa, Miguel de Unamuno, Antonio Machado, Juan Ramón Jiménez, and a long, long list of literary luminaries. They belong to all of us. They belong to all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for that very comprehensive introduction, which I have to say has negated me having to do a lot of work. We're going to have a panel discussion, and I hope that you in the audience feel free to ask any questions and to be part of the discussion. And then we're also going to have a poetry reading with some of the poems from the book. We have some of the poets in the audience who have contributed to the book who are here tonight, and they're going to read their work. So without further ado, I'm going to kick off the panel discussion by asking my dear friend Juan, who was Cervantes?
Thank you, David. Welcome and very nice meeting you all. Miguel de Cervantes was born in 1547 in the university town of Alcalá de Henares, very near Madrid. Madrid was not yet the capital of Spain. It will become so a few years later. Spain was then undergoing a huge transformation. It had expanded to a new world in America. The Spanish crown had dominions in Europe, in Flanders, the Low Countries, and in Italy, and with tensions, therefore. And it has conflict with the Ottoman Turks in the Mediterranean. The family of Cervantes was not a family of means. His father was a surgeon, not a high status then. However, he enjoyed a very good education under the humanist López de Hoyos. Europe in the 16th century was really undergoing a knowledge revolution. The invention of the printing press, the spread of books, the increasing literacy of the European population, the increasing number of universities and university students all over Europe. Richard Kagan, one of the most important Hispanists, has remarked that the Spanish dominions had the largest number of universities and the largest number of university students in comparison with the rest of Europe. And, Spain was also a very hierarchical society. To escape or to advance in social mobility, one could take advantage of this vast empire. For unknown reasons, Cervantes went to Italy, apparently because he had been involved in a duel and he wanted to escape the consequences. So he migrated with his elder brother to Italy, and there he joined the Spanish army. And we don't know much about Cervantes, so we are more intrigued for the things that we would like to know. In his own words, he wanted to remark, he sido un soldado. I've been a soldier, as an old soldier. And he remarked the two events that marked his life. The first was his participation in the naval battle of Lepanto in 1571, where Mediterranean Europe had a victory over the Ottoman Turks, and where Cervantes got a wound in his left hand. He has participated also in other military campaigns like Navarino, Corfu, Tunis. And the second event that marked his life was that on his return to Spain from the military campaigns, he was taken prisoner by pirates from Barbary in North Africa and held for ransom, and for a high ransom, because the Sultan of Algiers thought that he was a very principal man, because he was in possession of recommendation letters from Juan de Austria, the half-brother of the Spanish king, Philip II, and the Count of Cesar, one of the most important families of Spain, so the military commanders of the Spanish army in the Mediterranean. So he suffered 5 years slavery, 5 years and a half slavery, and he attempted 4 times to escape, but he couldn't make it. And finally, he was ransomed by a religious order that he was devoted to rescue Christians from North Africa, the Trinitarians, and also the family that became further more impoverished. In fact, if you want to go to Madrid, he's buried in the convent of the Trinitarias in Calle Lope de Vega in the downtown. But I think you cannot enter because it's a cloister monastery. And he says, from this experience, I learned patience on the face of adversity. In fact, adversity dominated all his life. He finally didn't get any recompense from his service in the army. He had jobs that he didn't like it, like a purveyor for the Spanish Armada, like a taxman. He even was thrown into prison because some business deal went wrong. His marriage was an unhappy one. His sisters gave him a lot of trouble. And however, he was never a bitter man. So the humanity of Cervantes shines throughout all his works. We have also a declaration by his sister, very brief, laconic, that he says, well, my brother writes. He has other business and he has many friends. Yes, Cervantes wanted to be a writer all his life. But he really was not also very successful as a writer. His first, he wrote poems, like more or less all the budding writers at the time. He wrote, the first published work was La Galatea, a pastoral novel, half prose, half verse, that also didn't have a very good reception. And he wrote this work, La Galatea, in 1585, so he was 38 years old. But since this moment, 20 years passed without having published anything else, until 1605, that he published Don Quixote, the first part of Don Quixote. And it became an instant success. It's impressive that from this year, 1605, he started to publish, he was then 58. So if some of you are writers, if you think that you have a chance, so you can write the book of your life still when you are a little bit older, no? And he published several works afterwards. It's prodigious how he could make it, and because there was an spurious copy of this Cervantes around the year 1613, 1614, he wrote quickly and he published a second part that becomes a part of Don Quixote in 1615. And he died the next year, 1616, but even 3 years before he died, in his deathbed, he finished the prologue of his last work, published posthumously, that is Persiles en Segismunda, that he thought to be the best, but is really not the best. So Cervantes, of course I will invite to read everything by Cervantes, but you will discover that his book that is treasured and loved is the best book is really Don Quixote.
Thank you very much, Juan. That's a very in-depth background to Cervantes and could give encouragement, as you say, to all of us who have yet to become successful authors. Does anyone in the room have any questions about Cervantes' background and history? If not, I'd like to move on to Peter Gordon and ask you, Peter, what is Don Quixote all about?
What's the book all about? It's about 800 pages.
Well, that should be easy for a man of your caliber to condense it down to about 7 minutes.
1 page or something, that's right. I'm going to start the first lines of Don Quixote, sort of say everything you need to know. So I'm going to start with those, and I hope you will forgive my Spanish. So it starts this way. En un lugar de la Mancha, some place in La Mancha, de cuyo nombre no quiero acordarme, of whose name I have no wish to remember. No ha mucho tiempo que vivía, not very long ago there lived un hidalgo, a gentleman, de los de la lanza en asterillo, adarga antigua, corocín flaco y galgo corredor, which is one of those gentlemen who has a lance and shield on a shelf and keeps a skinny nag, an old horse, and a greyhound for racing. And that's the way it starts. Now, we have this picture of Don Quixote as being this old man. Normally, you see him as an old man and sunken cheeks and a scraggly beard. And I did some sort of research trying to figure out how old he was, and it turns out that when Don Quixote was my age, he'd been dead for 2 years. So he's not quite as old as that. But the next thing we hear about this gentleman, Don Quixote was not his real name. His real name, this was the name that, his real name was Alonso Quijano, because this was his name. And Don Quixote was the name that he adopted later. So how did this guy decide he wanted to be a knight? And he read too much. This was the problem. In short, our gentleman became so immersed in his reading that he spent whole nights from sundown to sunup and his days from dawn to dusk in poring over his books. And finally, from so little sleeping and so much reading, his brain dried up and he went completely out of his mind. He had filled his imagination with everything that he had read, with enchantments, knightly encounters, battles, challenges, wounds, and tales of love and its torments, and all sorts of impossible things, and as a result had come to believe that all of these fictitious happenings were true. They were more real to him than anything else in the world. Now, the rest of the 2 books, because there are 2 books, tell of his adventures, which are pretty much made up and happening very much in his own mind. And there are really only 2 characters in the book. There's Don Quixote himself and this peasant that he picks up as his squire called Sancho Panza. And these are all these famous pictures you see of Picasso with this long, thin man and a short guy and a donkey. Those of you that know the story from Man of La Mancha, and you know there's a woman, Dulcinea, she actually never is in the book because it's all in his head. There's, again, a woman from the village who he kind of projects onto her this idea, but the love interest never really shows up. So there are lots of these adventures, but I think here's the one that probably everybody knows. Don Quixote is talking and he says, "Destiny guides our fortunes more favorably than we could have expected. Look there, Sancho Panza, my friend, and see those 30 or so wild giants with whom I intend to do battle and kill each and all of them so that their stolen booty we can begin to enrich ourselves. This is noble, righteous warfare, for it is wonderfully useful to God to have such an evil race wiped from the face of the earth." "What giants?" asked Sancho. "The ones you can see over there," answered Don Quixote, "with the huge arms, some of which are nearly 2 leagues long." "Now look, your grace," said Sancho, "what you see there aren't giants, but windmills. And what seems to be arms are just their sails that go round in the wind and turn the millstone." "Obviously," required Don Quixote, you don't know much about adventures. So this is pretty much the attitude that he takes with everything. And much of the book is about the interplay between these two characters. And I guess we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But one of the characteristics of the story is how down to earth it is. So I'll read another passage, which is, how should we put it, very earthy. Just then, whether it was the cold of the morning that was now approaching, or that he had eaten something laxative at supper, or that it was only natural, as is most likely, Sancho felt a desire to do what no one could do for him. But so great was the fear that had penetrated his heart that he dared not separate himself from his master by as much as the black of his nail. To escape doing what he wanted was, however, also impossible. So what he did for peace's sake was to remove his right hand, which he held at the back of the saddle, and with it to untie gently and silently the running string which alone held up his breeches, so that on loosening it they fell down round his feet like fetters. He then raised his shirt as well as he could and bared his hind quarters, no slim ones. But this accomplished, which he fancied was all he had to do to get out of this terrible strait and embarrassment, another still greater difficulty presented itself, for it seemed to him impossible to relieve himself without making some noise. And he ground his teeth and squeezed his shoulders together, holding his breath as much as he could, but in spite of his precautions, he was unlucky enough, after all, to make a little noise. Very different from that which was causing him so much fear. Don Quixote, hearing it, said, "What noise is that, Sancho?" "I don't know, senor," he said. "It must be something new, for adventures and misadventures never begin with a trifle." Once more he tried his luck and succeeded so well that without any further noise or disturbance, he found himself relieved of the burden that had given him so much discomfort. But as Don Quixote's sense of smell was as acute as his hearing, and as Sancho was so closely linked with him that the fumes rose almost in a straight line, it could not be but that some should reach his nose. And as soon as they did, he came to its relief by compressing it between his fingers, saying in a rather snuffling tone, "Sancho, it strikes me that thou art in great fear." "I am," answered Sancho, "but how does your worship perceive it now more than ever?" "Because just now thou smellest stronger than ever, and not of ambergris," answered Don Quixote. "Very likely," said Sancho, "but that's not my fault, but your worship's, for leading me about at unseasonable hours in such unwanted places." So this is a very human novel, and the people in it are very human. So I'll stop there, and we may come back to some of this later on.
Juan, I'd like to ask you, what are the roots of this book? How did it come about?
Well, this is an interesting question. So first, Cervantes was a great reader. He read many books, and it shows from his writing that he has read all the classics, Horace and all the Greco-Roman writers. He has read the latest of Italian literature. Orlando Furioso by Ariosto make a great influence on him. He read two very important Spanish works. That was La Celestina, not contemporary, but earlier 16th century. La Celestina is an acid critic of social mores, and El Lazarillo de Tormes, which is a picaresque novel. And the Spanish literary critic Damaso Alonso says that there is a progression in Spanish literature from the Middle Ages where psychological realism is progressing from Mio Cid, that is an epic romance, an epic ballad, but is completely the opposite to La Chanson de Roland in France. En el Arcipreste de Ita, Arcipreste de Talavera, La Celestina, El Lazarillo, these two words I have just mentioned. He also read the epic account of of Spanish America, which is La Araucana by José de Ercilla, which is among the works of the highest literary merit that comes from America at that time in the 16th century. And he also is influenced by the oral tradition and the folk tradition, the autos sacramentales, that they are religious plays, and by the theater that is experimenting a revolution. He wanted to be a playwright, but he really failed. So from at that time also the pastoral novel, as we have said, the Spanish ballads from that they really tried to take the heritage of the multicultural Spain in the Middle Ages with three cultures, that Jewish, Muslims, and Christians. And this is why it is said that his novel is completely new. So there is a before and after Don Quixote, because in the experimentation that many other writers are having at that time, Cervantes struck a completely new form or literary form, which is the novel, in where he's mixing many genres and many forms of speech from all these sources that we have been talking about. This is why it has been said that it's a modern novel, which is a more complex thing in literary theory. No?
Thank you, Juan. Tammy, I'd like to ask you, what's been the influence of Don Quixote in China or in Chinese literature?
It's probably the best-known Spanish writer in Chinese translation. Mainly, of course, due to Don Quixote. I must confess, I myself, not being a Spanish reader, I have not ventured into the book itself. My knowledge of Cervantes mainly come from all sorts of music inspired by Don Quixote. And my purpose here is to introduce what I contribute to this Cervantes year in mounting a concert consisting of a program of music from all based on the Don Quixote novel. So having confessed not knowing the original book myself, I will pass it back on to David to go on to further explore the literary side first. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Kingman. Actually, I'd value Tammy's view on the influence within Chinese literature.
Testing. In the second part of Don Quixote, before the prologue to the reader, there is a dedication to the Count of Lemons, also known as Don Pedro Fernandez Ruiz de Castro, who was actually Cervantes' patron. In this dedication, Cervantes complains about another Don Quixote, a false Don Quixote, whose practices actually greatly annoy him. What Cervantes refers to is the publication of a forged second part of Don Quixote in 1614 by an author whose identity still remains unknown today, which capitalized on the fame and popularity of the first part of Cervantes' book published 9 years earlier. Cervantes writes in the message to his patron, and I quote him, "And the person who has shown the deepest interest has been the great emperor of China, who sent an emissary with a letter for me in the Chinese language, asking, or I should say begging, me to send the knight to him, because he wanted to establish a college in which the Castilian language would be read and the book he wanted the students to read was the history of Don Quixote, unquote. The information contained in this dedication is interesting on several levels. Firstly, the Chinese emperor is portrayed to be rather gullible, as he believes the forged second part of Don Quixote to be authentic. Secondly, it suggests that Cervantes, the real-life author, a war veteran and former prisoner in foreign parts, was very much aware of the idea of what we today call globalization. He imagines the text of Don Quixote, in however counterfeit a version, to have traveled to the Far East and attracted immense interest, right up to the Supreme Office in China. Thirdly, the letter from the Chinese emperor, unsurprisingly written defiantly in Chinese, as if it were a universal language, concerns the very learning and circulation of languages, as the ultimate aim of the Emperor of China is to establish a college in which the Castilian language would be read. There is little doubt that Cervantes concocted the letter from the Chinese emperor and the emissary, and whatever fictional connections there might have been between China and Cervantes' text, in reality, it was not until 1978 when the first complete translation of Don Quixote into Chinese appeared, that the book actually reached a much wider audience in the country. Although there were translations into classical Chinese before then, it was this 1978 translation by Yuan Gong, who died in May this year, that is commonly considered to be the definitive Chinese translation of Don Quixote. Some Chinese people, they read Don Quixote earlier than that, however. For example, Lou Sun, the writer who is considered to have invented the modern Chinese vernacular novel, read a German translation of Don Quixote when he was in Japan in about 1908. Lou Sun is famous for his story, The True Story of RQ, published in 1921. RQ is considered to be Lou Sun's most representative character. Though of lowly social status and often bullied in his village, RQ confronts adversity through optimism, and he turns humiliation into what is called the spirit of victory. To give an example, in one episode, when RQ is beaten, he slaps himself on the face afterwards. And because he is the person doing the slapping, he sees himself as the victor, not the victim. This is the spirit of victory. While some may think that RQ ignorant, that he is ignorant and stubborn, others might see good qualities in him. And for better or worse, his name has entered colloquial Chinese RQism, RQ 精神, comes to describe the optimistic spirit of never feeling deflated or defeated. Even when struck down, one only need stand up again. The interesting thing about the true story of RQ in the context of tonight's discussion is that scholars have believed that Lou Sun was inspired by Cervantes' Don Quixote to write the story. The Q in RQ being an allusion to Quixote. Today, RQ is often compared to Don Quixote, such as in the following remark by the scholar Xiu Guan, and I quote him. Just as Cervantes left mankind with Don Quixote and Shakespeare bequeathed Hamlet to the world, so did Lou Sun produce the unforgettable character RQ. Great authors are forever the teachers of mankind, forever the nurses of mankind's soul, just as their characters all belong to mankind and are all immortal, unquote. Although Lou Sun did not live long enough to read Yuan Gong's translation of Don Quixote, it is worth mentioning the translation history of Cervantes' celebrated novel into contemporary Chinese. Yuan Gong translated Don Quixote during the Cultural Revolution in China, at which time many intellectuals were the targets of persecution. And in fact, Yuan Gong's manuscript was confiscated by the Red Guards, though it was fortunately later recovered. Many of you will remember that the dismissive remark on translation made by Don Quixote in the novel itself. The Don arrives in a modern publishing and printing shop, and he is introduced to a man who has just translated a book from Italian to Spanish. Don Quixote says, "It seems to me that translation from one language into another, if it be not from the queens of languages, Greek or Latin, is like looking at Flemish tapestries from the reverse side," unquote. When you look at the reverse side of a tapestry, what you see is a jumbled version of the front, even though both sides share the same threads. Yangon agrees with what Don Quixote says about translation. And in a talk she gave in 1982, she said, and I quote her, "It is certainly true that a translation cannot help but lose some of the brilliance of the original. Moreover, as a result of the Cultural Revolution, China's printing industry has deteriorated to the point that all of our foreign language publications contain countless spelling and punctuation errors. I merely hope that our translation is a little better than our printing," unquote. This remark, ostensibly showing Yangon's modesty and humbleness, and in agreement with Don Quixote about the inherent deficiency of translations, that is, they are just not as brilliant as their originals, in fact contains a veiled criticism of the effect of the Cultural Revolution on the production, conservation, and translation of literary works. According to the scholar Carlos Rojas, and I quote him, "Reading between the lines, we can read this allusion to the devastation that the Cultural Revolution wrought on China's domestic printing history as an allusion to the inhospitable political backdrop against which she had completed all her literary translations." We have so far looked at Don Quixote's influence on Lo Sun's writings in the early 20th century and the background of the Cultural Revolution to the first complete translation of the novel into Chinese by Yangon. Interestingly, apart from literary influences and linguistic exchange, Don Quixote has another connection to China, that is, to China's professional journalists. For them, Don Quixote has become an increasingly relevant metaphor in the face of censorship, propaganda, and corruption. Whereas the knight in the novel believes the large windmills are giants to be overwhelmed, in the context of Chinese investigative or in-depth reporting, says China analyst David Bandersky, and I quote him, "The windmills are monsters, and they are the sum total of the social and political ills from which China suffers. These investigative reporters make it their business to serve a greater public interest, like romantic fools on a hopeless errand," unquote. The investigative reporter Lo Yagong, for example, is believed to have once said prior to a dangerous reporting assignment, and I quote him, "Often the opponent we face is like an army, or like a monster with countless arms. If one person or a few people face off against something as vast as this, something webbed with self-interest, we are like Don Quixote, or at best like a band of Don Quixotes," unquote. I would like to end my answer to Dave's question with two further examples. I will keep it very short. Two happier examples of the enduring connections between Don Quixote and China. In 2010, a 3D film adaptation of Don Quixote, a joint Hong Kong and China production, was released. Does anyone know this film? Maybe more popular in China. In the film, the story of Don Quixote is relocated from 16th century Spain to China's Tang Dynasty. And the protagonist is obsessed with martial arts novels. The film was billed as the first fully 3D film from China. On the other hand, in November last year, Don Quixote was adapted into Genju, which is a high-pitched opera style in the southern Chinese dialect that has a history of over 600 years. This genremorphosis is in itself quite remarkable. But more remarkable still is the fact that this Genju version was performed in Madrid, with the performers wearing traditional face paint. Spanish subtitles were provided for the audience members. These two examples show that Don Quixote, for the Chinese imagination, is versatile enough to be adapted into both one of the most one of the oldest art forms, as well as a contemporary 3D blockbuster film. And I believe Don Quixote will continue to inspire new works in new forms, forging new connections in China.
Thank you, Tammy. And this leads a very nice segue into asking a question of Kingman, because he has an upcoming musical production. And Kingman, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about this and what the relevance of Don Quixote is to this.
Well, the originator of this idea of a concert in commemoration of the 400th anniversary of the death of Cervantes came from no less a person than Peter Gordon. I was actually planning a performance of great opera scenes based on Shakespeare. And because of doing that, I involved Peter in doing the subtitles for the opera scenes. He reminded me that Cervantes also died in the same year as Shakespeare. In fact, some say it is only 1 day difference. I'm not sure which died first, but today Peter told me that in fact there could be a mistake in the calculation of the calendars. They might have both died on the same day. So it's the two great writers of the age, one in English and one in Spanish, happened to pass away on the same day. Is a very thought-provoking event. So due to that remark from Peter Gordon, reminding me that these two great writers actually died in the same year, prompted me to think of planning a similar program on music inspired by Cervantes. But in fact, all music inspired by Cervantes was music inspired by Don Quixote, because that is the book from which inspiration was drawn for composers to write music. The most well-known concert piece of music probably was Richard Strauss's symphonic poem called Don Quixote, written for a very large orchestra with a cello solo suggesting the character Don Quixote. But I do not imagine planning a concert with that kind of resources was practicable. So I focused my attention on things that we can do with reasonably economical resources requirement, and also artistically it can be interpreted well by local Hong Kong artists. So I focus my attention on vocal music. There are two sets of songs by two very famous French composers written on Don Quixote. One is by Maurice Ravel, a very famous French musician, but who was also half Spanish, because Ravel's mother was Basque. And Ravel, of course, wrote many pieces based on his understanding and his upbringing, the influence of his mother, directly related to Spain. This set of songs is called Songs from Don Quixote to Dulcinea, his imagined ideal woman, was commissioned by a film director to be used as incidental musical pieces in the film. But this director was not very honest in obtaining these famous composers' contribution, because he at the same time commissioned 4 other composers to write the same thing. So in the end, this director chose another French composer's set of songs. It's called 4 Songs of Don Quixote by Jacques Ibert. And eventually Ibert's suite was chosen. And this caused a scandal within the classical musical world because Ibert, out of his respect to Ravel, was very angry and decided to sue the director. But eventually, Ravel was also very reasonable. He knows it's not the fault of Ibert that he wrote another set of songs. So eventually, both sets of songs became very famous. Ibert's was used in the film, and in the film, the part of Don Quixote was acted by a very famous Russian bass called Shalyapin. Anyone who knows the operatic music must have heard of Shalyapin. And he made Ibert's songs very well known. But Ravel's also separately had a very respectable history on the concert stage. And it is one of the best set of songs written on the story of Don Quixote. Now, another very famous French writer, composer, also based his masterpiece, an opera in 4 acts called Don Quixote, which is the French form of Don Quixote. So I selected a scene in which Don Quixote serenades Dulcinea, his ideal woman. And in this opera, however, like all operas adapted from famous literary subjects, somehow had to truncate the original idea and twist the plot to such an extent that the original village girl, Aldonza, disappear in Massenet's opera. And that the whole opera, the female character bears the name of Dulcinea. But whereas, in fact, in the story, Aldonza could not at first understand why Don Quixote kept on calling her Dulcinea. And this part was entirely wiped out by Massenet. So I selected a scene in which these two exchange their own very distinctly different viewpoints on humanity. Then the Spanish themselves also had many ventures in turning Don Quixote into music. To me, the most Spanish one is by De Falla, who wrote a small short opera of about 1 hour called Retablo de Maese Pedro, Master Peter's Puppet Theater. And at first, when I planned this concert, I wanted to stage this whole opera as one half of the concert. But eventually it turned out to be too expensive for the resources I could have obtained to do it. My idea is, instead of having a Spanish puppet theater, to use children to act as puppets. And the opera itself consists of only 3 singing parts. A boy introducing the story of the puppet show. Master Peter, the owner of the puppet theater, and Don Quixote himself. So it is taken from a very short passage in the novel in which Don Quixote, in a moment of confusing reality with his imagination, thought that the puppet theater was actually real life, and he intervenes and insists on changing the plot of the puppet theater. Well, it's a pity that I could not include this item in the forthcoming concert. But instead, again, agreed between myself, Juan, and Peter, we substitute that with a selection from the most famous musical based on Don Quixote. It's called The Man of La Mancha, an American Broadway show. So in this, I try to play the reverse of Massenet, because in the Man of La Mancha, the musical, Don Quixote actually sees Aldonza, and Aldonza does not believe in Don Quixote. And with the song, The Impossible Dream, Don Quixote convinced Aldonza that there is another world, not as mundane and petty as the real world that we normally experience. And there is this impossible dream that his spirit wants to realize. And that convinces Aldonza to accept his calling her Dulcinea. And I selected the songs from this connection to end the concert. And the concert also includes some Spanish and some expatriate Spanish in South America, written pieces based on Don Quixote, and largely thanks to Juan, who drew my attention to this. Yeah.
Kingman,
So-
can you tell us when, for the audience, when is this program going to be and whereabouts?
The 9th of November at the concert hall, at the City Hall Theater. This will be an evening supported by both the representative of the Spanish nation and the Mexican country.
Excellent. I suggest everybody put that in their diary immediately. I wonder if there's any questions or any contributions from the audience. A gentleman there in the red and white shirt.
Yeah, about the book, that was it has a first part and then the second part. Just curious, when Cervantes finished the first part, was he contemplating the second part?
Apparently not.
No.
Apparently not. So, and there are some differences between the first and the second part. So, of course, now we can understand the book as a whole. But if you read them, so the second part is much more complex and deeper, and somehow, well, I must say that so the book was justified because the literary genre that was more popular at that time in the 16th century in Spain was the chivalric books. Most of these books were really not very good or not of literary merit, and they were very fantastic, except two of them that for Cervantes, even in the first part, when the priests and the neighbors start to make a fire of the books, to burn the books, because Cervantes got mad because of reading so many books. They said, so these chivalry books are really so bad, except two. One is Amadís de Gaula, and the other is Tirant lo Blanc by Joanot Martorell, a book in the Catalan language. And Cervantes praised these two. But I have said that he didn't succeed as a poet, he didn't succeed as a playwright, and he wanted to break with this passion for chivalric books. So what is a wasting time books, he says. And this justified and was the purpose of the first part. He discovered that through this genre, through a novel, through the characters, also as Peter has mentioned at the beginning, he created a new art. So through normal life, through two characters, that they have adventures and they have dialogues, and finally they go together. They are sometimes quarreling a lot, but as the novel goes through, they are influencing each other, and they have more in common. And he somehow exploits the benefits of what he has invented in the first part to create a second part that is more complex. So I don't want to go too far in this one, but actually Tammy has said that what prompted this second part was an imitation. And probably the writer who imitated was another soldier writer with whom he didn't get along. Cervantes also was a little bit famous because he didn't get along with Lope de Vega and Mateo Alemán, two great writers of the time, but we don't have also to exaggerate much of this. No? And I hope I have answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much.
And sorry, the second question is, when we talk about Quixote, we can imagine the person, the skinny old man. Like, is this all from the descriptions, from the writings, or did Cervantes really drew someone? Or
No, it's a great description throughout. In the first pages, there is a physical description. So, of course, there is this book. There has been a great critical work because still we are discovering what Son of the Wars means. And there is, I have here, but I forgot a canonic edition in Spanish by Francisco Rico with a great number of notes. So we understand how was the profile, physical and mental. So he was a guy that was of the low nobility, not much means, but not very poor. So what we call hidalgo in Spain, in Spanish. And he also liked hunting. And he was more or less a religious person. The description is admirable, so you have to read, and if possible, read with an edition that it has footnotes and you can understand more and more. No? It's a book to read many times. You will discover many things.
thank you.
Thank you, Juan. We're running out of time a little bit. One of the reasons for this panel is to promote this book, which is Quixotica, Poems East of La Mancha. And these are poems written by Asian authors, Asian writers based in the region. And we're very lucky that we have some of the contributors here in the room with us tonight. And I'm going to invite them to come up and read their contributions. And the first one we're going to start with is Aiken JJ, who was trying to slide out of it by pointing to Jason Lee instead, but I'm putting Aiken on the spot because he's got a young child to get home to, so I'm giving him a break. Please give a big hand for Aiken JJ.
And for anybody who's following in the book, how many of you have gotten the book so far? I strongly encourage you to, after the seminar, go out and pick up one. Anybody who's following, my poem's on page 54. And what I did was basically used the theme of Quixote to a wider theme in local Hong Kong politics. And the term Quixotic, I'll use the English, forgive me, can on one hand mean something fantastical, illusory, and even hopeless, but a positive way of looking at it could be also brave, noble, and romantic. And in the course of what's been going on in Hong Kong, only history will decide that. So I'll just get into the poem, Death of Chivalry. An age of chivalry falls in a blazing storm of bricks, batons, and pepper mist. Amidst a scattering of steaming Dai Pai dongs, broken market stalls, and fleeing activists. Senor Alonso Quijada is indigenous. He charges full tilt, scything the skies down to size. The errant knight engages in fierce and unequal combat. His fear is that his foes flow rather than stand as sentinel bulwarks. His heraldic banner is an angry pyre fluttering at winds of empire. El fuego mata todo. Everything gets killed by the fire. Our Quixote is heir to where the past is still here. He forgets the past has been forgotten everywhere. Don Alonso, we will ride with you. We are no Sanchos. We will not persuade you to be cautious. We will not denounce you, nor claim your aspirations are outdated fantasies. We will not burn your tomes, close your bookstores, or cause their merchants to disappear. We will not be counsel to or harbingers of despair. We are not apparitions. We stand here. Tack up your Rocinante, tough and unyielding as the leather with which she is laden. Gird your rusted blade upon your lank thigh, most mighty. With your faded glory and threadbare majesty, harness your courage for the final foray. The Moorish air, El Deguelo, is a dark, tarred mist above the electric skyline. Hope dwindles into the heavy laps of the harbor sea. Fate is certain. You are magnificent, Senor Quixote. Your name, honored Hidalgo, is nobly poetic. We are proud to stand with you. We declare ourselves quixotic. The last charge will be fatal. The last stand will be heroic.
Incidentally, Mr. Moderator, I wish to announce that in the concert program, I've left two spaces for selection from this book to be read by professionals or the authors themselves too during the concert.
So this could be doing double duty as an audition.
Yep.
Right, well, the next aspiring thespian is Vicky Holmes. Please give a big hand for Vicky.
Thank you very much. I was very interested.
Yeah, you better face this way, actually. No, just joking.
Thank you, everyone. If you'd like to have a look, if you're following, it's on page 10. I was very interested, Kingman, to hear about the songs for Dulcinea, who takes on a different character in my poem. Then Dulcinea, rather than being imaginary, begins to do some imagining of her own. So this is Dulcinea Dreams of Rescue. Last night, I dreamed all your poems strung into narrative, show trials and the kidnapping of a judge, me, while you waited to teleport us with your diamond ring. We escaped, of course, the remnants of your perfect kiss lingering for days after the convoluted plot had subsided. Black masks as we entered the castle, masquerade cat burglars, nylons to obscure vision. Mine was different, they said. Judges are allowed to see the route certain privileges ensue. Of course, it was a sign, but not for me. The goat tied to the village post, the trompe-l'oeil, the prestige. I found no way out. The winding stairs, smallest corner. How I pelted my way to you and your diamond. Up on the balcony, the waiting spaceship far above. We'd succeeded, of course. Eponymous heroes always do. But mostly, I remember the certainty of how your mouth met mine in a side street, like all the knowledge in the world that day had come and rested on my open lips. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vicky. The next poet will be Jason Eng-hun Lee. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you, Dave. This poem is based on a song, actually, that was made popular in a 1960s film, I think, called The Thomas Crown Affair. And it's been written as a kind of lyric. And it's really to kind of poke fun at the idea of the style of Cervantes' Don Quixote. It's also to say something about, you know, what's going on in Hong Kong and how we can sometimes actually make light of our situation. I can read it or I can sing it. I don't really mind.
No, read it. We haven't got a backing band here.
Okay.
Next time.
Next time, Dave, I'll rope you in. Okay, Windmills of the Mind, page 69. It's a sign of troubling times when in the midst of our despair, our minds revolve around us and we see foes everywhere. We shake our heads from side to side as though caught in a trance. Beguiled of all our futures now, we eulogize our past. A looming shadow hovers, unseen over our heads. Some say we're slaying giants, others that we're delusional instead. We flail our arms from side to side, as though struggling in vain. No tales of fallen heroes, umbrellas cast down in the rain. Forgive our high-helmed ideals, our grandiose inventions. We have our well-phrased passages, our lovely romantic endings. Spinning round in circles, we've grown to love these chaotic times, not knowing if we've become mad, trapped in the windmills of our minds.
Thank you very much, Jason. The last poet that we have here is Tammy, who's also one of the editors, who's done a great job on putting together this collection. So please give a big hand to Tammy Ho Lai-ming.
Testing. I just want to say I really love Vicky's reading. She's always so gentle, romantic, and captivating. My poem is on page 76, and it makes reference to the book burning scene in chapter 6 in the first part of Don Quixote, the scene that Aiken's poem also makes reference to. Books as wild grass, 書是野草. I don't actually have the entire translation, I just have the translation of the title. Books as wild grass, The barber, curate, niece, and housekeeper, joined together as one, enter Don Quixote's locked library, lined with mischievous volumes, well read and bound, determined to commit them to fierce fire. Some will be spared such punishing fate should their titles prove worthy. The first chivalry book of its kind in Spain, for example, though the begetter of many, is not flung from the window and burned, while Cervantes' own Galatea is also saved. The next day, ashes and ashes and ashes. Don Quixote is told and convinced that a magician overnight has vanished his books into smoky air, begging the question, how can a crime be so human be committed by humans? Today, books aren't turned into bonfire too often in this part of the world, either to protect a friend's sanity or a leader's dignity. Instead, they are censored, their sellers carried away while traveling, carried away from their homes. Law of life, nobody can bark, books are only words, words only. Leaves of nothing that catch fire like flaming butterflies. The more they are suppressed, rejected, mistranslated, destroyed, the more power to them. One down, another sprouts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tammy. That's the end of the evening. I urge everybody to buy a copy on the way out. Thank you very much for coming. It's been a lovely evening, very informative and inspiring, and hope to see you next year when it's somebody else's 100th or 200th or 300th anniversary. And thanks to Peter, who's the publisher of Chameleon Press, whose initiative it was to make these books. The first one last year being the centenary of Octavio Paz, and this year being the 400 years since Cervantes' death. So perhaps, since we've heard tonight the link between not just literary arts, but also music and theatre, we may well have a project next year of poets inspired by great painters or musicians. I'll leave that over to you, Peter. And thank you all for coming, and look forward to seeing you again.